Hey, everyone, and welcome to uh, this deep dive that we've got lined up for you today.
Yeah,
We're going to be talking about something I think that you're really going to find interesting.
for sure.
The whole concept of Christ the King
Mm-hmm.
and what that means for us as Christians living in the world today.
Yeah.
This excerpt that we have for you really kind of pushes back against maybe some common assumptions that a lot of us hold about what it means for Christ to be king.
Absolutely. And I think a good place for us to start is to actually look at the origins of this whole idea of Christ the King, because a lot of people, it's such a common phrase that a lot of people maybe just assume that it's something that, has been around forever.
Right.
But in reality, it has a surprisingly recent origin and a very political one at that.
Yeah, you're talking about 1925 when Pope Pius XI uh, instituted the Feast of Christ the King.
That's right. Yeah. And on the surface, it might seem like just a purely, religious event, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Right.
To understand it, we need to think about the context of the Roman question, which was essentially this big dispute between the papacy and the newly unified Italian state
Right.
over who held true authority.
Right.
So you have the Pope, who had lost his temporal power, right? His control over actual land and governance.
Mhm.
And this Feast of Christ the King was a way for him to kind of reassert his spiritual authority in a world that was rapidly embracing secularism and nationalism.
Right. So it's kind of like,
Hmm.
okay, you might have taken away, my earthly kingdom,
Right.
but Christ is king, and I represent him, so my spiritual dominion remains.
Exactly. It's this power move in a very subtle way.
Wow.
Now, the author of our excerpt actually finds this whole idea of Christ the King
Yeah.
kind of troubling.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, too, because it seems like they're pushing back against this idea that we should just sort of passively accept the state of the world
Yeah.
and say, well, Christ reigns in heaven, but down here on earth, it's a different story.
Yeah.
So that raises an interesting question for me.
Mm-hmm.
Is acknowledging Christ as king,
Yeah.
is that enough? Or does that demand something more from us?
That's a great question. And I think that, to kind of unpack that, we can think about it this way. We
Yeah.
have bishops here on earth to guide the church, right?
Right.
So shouldn't there be some attempt to reflect Christ's kingship in our societies as well,
Right.
not just accept the way things are?
Right, that's a great point.
Mm.
And the author seems to definitely advocate for something more active, something more engaged.
For sure.
They call for Christians to actually work towards a Christian social order.
Right.
And they get pretty specific, too.
Yeah.
They envision the establishment of Orthodox Christian monarchies
Right.
as the ideal.
Yeah, and they really have this ambitious vision, right? They want to see the faith not just surviving,
Right.
but actually shaping societies across the globe. I mean, they even imagine Orthodox cathedrals on Mars someday.
Well, hold on. Orthodox cathedrals on Mars.
Yeah.
That's quite a vision.
It is. It's ambitious.
Yeah. I mean, is that even achievable in the world that we live in today?
Well, and they acknowledge that it's difficult, right?
Right.
But their argument is that just because something seems impossible, Christians shouldn't just resign themselves to the status quo.
Right.
We're each called to live out our faith, spread the good news, and actually work toward a world that aligns with God's will,
Mm-hmm.
no matter how challenging it may seem.
And this excerpt also dives into the whole end times discussion,
Oh, yeah.
which I thought was interesting because the author seems to have a kind of unique perspective on that. It's not the fire and brimstone that we often hear about.
Yeah, they actually kind of push back against this idea that
Right.
we're living in the final days, even though
Right.
things might feel really bleak at times.
Right.
Their argument is that every generation has faced its own version of the apocalypse, whether it's personal struggles or social upheavals or widespread persecution.
Okay.
There's always something that seems like the end of the world.
But true Christians should be motivated by their faith and their mission,
Right.
not fear or despair about the future.
So they're basically saying we shouldn't get so caught up in, these end-of-the-world scenarios
Yeah.
that we lose sight of our mission as
Exactly.
Christians. Which leads us to this question, if we're not supposed to be just sitting around waiting for the world to end,
Right.
what are we actually supposed to be doing?
Mm.
What actions should we be taking that align with this idea of Christ as king?
Well, this is where the author introduces this really fascinating concept,
Okay.
the idea of every Christian being a priest king.
Okay. Now, that's not a term that I hear every day.
I know, right?
So can you break that down for us?
Sure.
What does it actually mean to be a priest king?
It's a really powerful idea.
Yeah.
And it takes us all the way back to Genesis.
Okay.
Remember, Adam was given dominion over the earth.
Right.
He was responsible for caring for creation and offering it back to God in praise and thanksgiving.
So in a sense, he was like the first priest king.
Oh, okay. So we've kind of inherited that same responsibility.
Exactly. This idea of royal priesthood
Mm.
should be reflected in everything we do, how we live, how we interact with others,
Mm.
how we shape the world around us.
Okay. So it's more than just, going to church on Sunday.
Right.
It's about taking what we've been given,
Yeah.
our talents, our time, our resources, and offering them back to God as an act of service and sacrifice.
It's about that transformation of the world around us.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this connects to the author's vision for a Christian social order.
Yeah.
It's not just about, spreading the faith.
Mm.
It's about actually transforming society,
Yeah.
making it a reflection of God's glory, even on a small scale.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. It's about looking at everything we do as an opportunity to sanctify creation, as the author puts it.
Okay.
So it's less about building cathedrals on Mars and more about bringing a little bit of heaven to earth right here, right now.
Yeah. That bringing a little bit of heaven to earth right here, right now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of finding that balance,
Yeah.
right? Acknowledging that Christ is already king,
Right.
but also actively working to make that kingship more visible
For sure.
in the world around us.
Yeah, and I think that's where the author's challenge really resonates, right? It's this call to reject complacency, to refuse to just accept things as they are,
Right.
and instead embrace this radical transformative power of the gospel.
Right. It's about taking that belief
Yeah.
and turning it into action,
Mm-hmm.
into a way of life
Yeah.
that reflects the kingdom we claim to be citizens of.
Right. And it's about challenging ourselves to actually live up to this calling of being priest kings,
Yeah.
to be those agents of transformation in a world that so desperately needs it.
Now, to bring this back to something a little bit more concrete,
Okay.
the author specifically talks about the importance of focusing on our own nations first.
Yes, they argue that, before we go trying to convert the whole world, we need to get things right in our own backyard.
Right?
It's about building that strong foundation,
Yeah.
strong, faithful communities that can then serve as a model and inspiration for others.
I love that it's kind of like a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Starting small
Yeah.
and then expanding outward, one person, one community, one nation at a time.
And remember, it's not just about spreading the faith, right?
Right.
It's about living it out in a way that actually transforms the world around us.
Okay, so we've talked about this big vision
Mhm.
of being priest kings
Yeah,
and transforming society.
right.
But I think a lot of listeners might be wondering,
Yeah.
how does this apply to my own life?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I might not be a king or a queen in the traditional sense.
Right.
So what can I actually do?
That's a great question. And I
Yeah.
think it starts with recognizing that we all have a role to play in this grand narrative,
Mm,
right? We might not wear crowns or sit on thrones,
Right.
but we can all embody that priest-king spirit in our own unique ways.
So practically speaking, what would that look like? I mean,
Yeah.
how do we actually live out this royal priesthood in the midst of our everyday routines and responsibilities?
Well, it's about recognizing that everything we've been given, our talents, our time, our resources,
Mm,
are ultimately gifts from God.
right.
And those gifts are meant to be used for His purposes, not just our own.
So seeing our work, our relationships, even just our lives
Yeah.
as opportunities to sanctify creation,
Mm-hmm.
to make the world a little bit more like the kingdom of God.
Exactly. And I think that's where the author's challenge really hits home.
Okay.
It's not about waiting for someone else to create that perfect Christian society.
Right.
It's about taking ownership of our own kingdoms,
Mhm.
however small they may seem,
Right.
and working to make them reflect God's love and justice.
I think that's such a powerful message, especially for people who maybe feel overwhelmed
Yeah.
or discouraged by the state of the world. It reminds us that even small acts of love and service can make a difference.
Yeah, and it ties back to that idea of, not getting bogged down
Right.
by end times anxieties, right? Instead of focusing on what might happen in the future.
Right.
The author is encouraging us to really pour our energy into building up the kingdom
Mhm.
here and now.
I love that shift in perspective.
Yeah.
It's not about escaping the world,
Right.
but about redeeming it, about bringing light to the darkness,
Yeah.
one small act of love at a time.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, this all sounds great in theory,
Right.
but what does sanctifying creation actually look like in practice?
Right. Because it can feel pretty abstract.
Yeah,
Can you
Yeah.
give us some concrete examples
sure.
of how someone might live out their royal priesthood in their daily life?
Well, think about the things that you're passionate about.
Okay.
The skills that you have, the people you interact with every day. How can you use those things to bring a little bit more beauty, truth, and goodness
Right.
into the world?
Mm-hmm.
It could be something as simple as being a good listener,
Yeah.
offering a helping hand to someone in need,
Mhm.
or using your creative talents to inspire others.
I love those examples
Yeah.
because it shows that it's not necessarily about doing something extraordinary.
Right.
It's about doing ordinary things
Yeah,
with an extraordinary heart.
precisely.
Mm.
It's about approaching everything we do with a sense of purpose,
Okay.
with the awareness that we're not just living for ourselves,
Right.
but for something much larger.
Now, I know the author specifically talks about establishing Orthodox Christian monarchies,
Mm-hmm.
which might seem a little far-fetched to some listeners,
Right.
but I think the underlying message
Yeah,
really resonates regardless of your political or religious background.
absolutely. You're right. At its core, this idea of Christ the King
Mm.
is about recognizing a higher authority,
Right.
a set of values that transcends the whims of human politics or cultural trends.
It's about seeking something more meaningful
Yeah.
than just worldly success or personal fulfillment.
It's about orienting our lives towards something bigger than ourselves,
Right.
something that gives us that sense of purpose and direction.
And I think that's something that we all crave, whether we realize it or not.
For sure.
You know, we all want to feel like our lives matter,
Mhm.
like we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah. And this idea of Christ the King offers us a way to tap into that deeper longing,
Mm-hmm.
to connect with a source of meaning and purpose
Right.
that can sustain us through all of life's challenges.
But it also challenges us too, right?
Absolutely.
It pushes us to ask ourselves some hard questions about how we're living,
Yeah.
what our priorities are,
Right.
whether our actions are actually lining up
Mm.
with the values of the kingdom we claim to be a part of.
It's not a call to complacency.
Right.
It's a call to action.
Right. It's a call to become more
Yeah.
fully alive, more fully human by
Mm.
aligning ourselves with the will of God
Mm.
and using our gifts to make the world a better place.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay?
I want to bring us back to that central question that we started with. What does it really mean to say Christ is King?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just a statement of belief, or is it something more?
That's the question we've been wrestling with
Yeah.
throughout this whole deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the author would say it's definitely more than just a statement.
Right.
It's a call to action.
For sure.
It's a way of life.
It's a reminder that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves,
Right.
that we have a role to play in this grand drama of redemption.
It's about taking that belief and translating it
Yeah.
into concrete actions, into a way of life
Mhm.
that reflects the values of the kingdom we claim to be citizens of.
It's about challenging ourselves to live up to this high calling of our royal priesthood, to be agents of transformation in a world that desperately needs it.
So as we come to the end of this deep dive,
Yeah.
I'm left with a question for you, our listener.
Okay.
The source text argues that Christians shouldn't resign themselves to the status quo,
Mm-hmm.
even if achieving a truly Christian society seems impossible.
Yeah.
What do you think?
How does this challenge your perspective on being a Christian in the modern world?
Mm-hmm.
Does it inspire you to action? Does it make you question your own assumptions?
Right.
These are the questions worth wrestling with,
Because ultimately this deep dive isn't just about gathering information.
right?
It's about sparking a transformation.
Yeah.
It's about helping you to see the world and your place in it
Mm-hmm.
with fresh eyes.
And maybe, just maybe, it's about planting a seed that will grow into something truly remarkable, something that will bring a little bit more of Christ's kingdom to earth.
Right.
One thought, one action, one life at a time.
You know, it's so easy to just get caught up in the day-to-day and lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
But this deep dive has really helped me to reconnect with that sense of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That idea that we're all called to be a part of something so much bigger
Yeah.
than ourselves.
And I think that's the beauty of this concept of Christ the King.
Right.
It's not just about abstract theological ideas, right? It's about finding a way to live those ideas out in the real world,
Yeah.
in the midst of all the messiness and complexity of life.
It's about taking those lofty ideals
Yeah.
and actually grounding them
Mm-hmm.
in our everyday experiences, our relationships, our work, our communities.
It's about making that kingdom of God a reality,
Mm-hmm.
one small act of love and service at a time.
And it's a mission that's never truly finished.
It's not.
It's an ongoing journey,
Yeah.
a constant striving
Well.
to align our lives with God's will
Mm-hmm.
and make the world a little bit more like the kingdom
Yeah.
we're called to be a part of.
And I think that's what makes this whole conversation so exciting, right? It's not about reaching some distant endpoint.
Right.
It's about embracing the journey,
Right.
that process of becoming more fully who we're meant to be.
And that process can be challenging.
Oh, for sure.
It can even be messy at times,
Yeah,
but it's also incredibly rewarding
absolutely.
because it connects us to something much deeper than ourselves.
Yeah.
Something that gives our lives meaning and
Mm.
purpose.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I just want to encourage you, our listener,
Mhm.
to take some time to really reflect
Right.
on what we've discussed.
Yeah, don't just let these ideas wash over you.
Right.
Really wrestle with them.
Ask yourself, what does it mean for you
Mm.
to acknowledge Christ as King?
Right.
How does that belief actually shape your daily life,
Right.
your interactions with others,
Right.
your hopes for the future?
And you don't have to have all the answers right now.
You don't.
This is a journey, like
Yeah.
lifelong exploration
It is.
of what it means to live out your faith in a world that desperately needs it.
And as always, this deep dive was curated specifically for you.
That's right.
We hope it's given you some food for thought, some new perspectives,
Mhm.
and maybe even a little bit of inspiration to live out your royal priesthood
Mhm.
in the world.
Until next time,
Yeah,
keep exploring,
keep questioning.
keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
That's right.